Welcome to Anatomy and Physiology. The first chapter we will study is an orientation to the human body. Before we can start learning about anatomy, we must learn some basic definitions. Anatomy is the study of structure of body parts and their relationship to one another. So anatomy is the study of parts, but it's really more than that. It's not just a study of the heart or the lungs, but how the heart and the lungs relate to each other. The heart's in the center of the lungs in an area known as the mediastinum. So anatomy is more than just a study of structure or parts, but their relationships. In this course, we're going to be doing general anatomy, which sometimes is harder than specific anatomy because there are so many body parts. As you progress up the different levels of your learning, you may take a class in the future that's gross anatomy, where you just study parts or organs or structures in the body that you can see. Or you might study microscopic anatomy, sometimes called cytology, where you study cells, structures that you can't see without the aid of a microscope. And then maybe you're going to study the development of a zygote all the way into an embryo and then a fetus and then into a baby. So anatomy is a little more than the study of parts, but that's a pretty good definition to start with. We also need to learn what physiology is. Physiology is the study of function, physiology of function. So how those parts that we learn in the anatomy portion, how they work, how they function, and not just how they function by themselves, but maybe how they function with other organs. For example, the heart is connected to blood vessels, so the heart pumps blood through the blood vessels, and one place that blood goes is the lungs. We're going to get rid of carbon dioxide and take on oxygen to be delivered throughout the body. So physiology is the function of the whole body or body structures. Now in your book, if you're reading your book, and I hope you are, they list several subdivisions of physiology, and you can look at those and see if you're interested in some. I'm not going to hold you responsible for those individually on the test. There are three essential concepts in anatomy and physiology. The first one is complementarity. Complementarity of structure and function means that structure and function complement each other. The heart is made with 4 chambers so that it can receive blood from the body in the right chambers, and then it can send blood to the body through the left chambers. So the structure of the heart is directly related to its function. The way the heart functions also complements how other organs, for example, the lungs work and where the lungs are. So in anatomy and physiology, structure and function complement each other. It's very hard to talk about one sometimes without talking about the other. A second major concept in A&P is the hierarchy of structural organization, meaning that all living things are based on a certain hierarchy, starting with simple and going complex. Everything on this earth is made of chemicals. Chemicals are the basic forms of matter. Atoms combine to form molecules. Well, molecules go together, and when you put that spark of life, that protoplasm, you divide with membranes, then you move from a level of chemicals to a level of cells. Cells are the basic unit of life. They're the smallest unit of life. We put cells together that do similar jobs, and now we've moved to the tissue level. In the human body, there are 4 types of tissues: epithelial, connective, nervous, and muscle. Epithelial covers and lines. Connective does just what it says. It connects structures. Nervous is a controlling tissue, and muscle is usually mostly for movement, but other functions as well. And we'll discuss those later when we get to the chapter on tissues. Tissues go together to make organs. Organs go together to make organ systems, and there are 11 organ systems in your body. We will go through all 11 in a minute, talking very basic information about them, because throughout this semester and next semester, if you take A&P2, we'll cover all 11 systems in greater detail. Now, organ systems go together to be an organism. So we have chemicals being the basic. Chemicals go together to be cells. Cells go together to be tissues. Tissues go together to be organs. Organs go together to be organ systems. And organ systems go together to be an organism. So now you do it. The smallest level of structural organization, chemicals. Chemicals to go together to be the basic unit of life, cells. Cells go together to be tissues. Tissues go together to be organs. Organs go together to be organ systems. And organ systems go together to be an organism. And in this class, we'll be talking about the human. Let's look at the first system. This is actually the first system we'll cover in A&P1. It is the integumentary system, and from the picture you can see that includes the hair, the skin, and the nails. The skin forms the external body covering. The integumentary system is composed of skin, sweat glands, oil glands, hair, and nails. And one of the major functions of the integumentary system is that it protects deep tissues from injury and it synthesizes vitamin D. Now, those are not the only organs of the system, and those are not the only functions. We're just going to very generally list here, and later in the semester we'll get more specific. The second system you cover in A&P1 is the skeletal system, and of course the skeletal system is composed of bones, but it's also composed of cartilage, which is sometimes found at the end of bones, or some types of bones actually form from cartilage, and then ligaments. Ligaments hold bone to bone. I can remember that it's not tendon because bone to bone is something like, so bone to bone is a ligament. The function of the skeletal system is to protect and support the body organs, to provide framework for the muscles, and it is also the site of blood cell formation, hemopoiesis. And it stores minerals. Calcium and phosphorus are two. Those are actually the minerals, salts, that go together to make bones hard. The third system we'll cover in Anatomy 1 is the muscular system, and we'll spend most of our time talking about skeletal muscles, although there are three types of muscles in the human body: smooth muscle found in hollow organs, cardiac muscle found in the heart, and skeletal muscles that generally attach to bone. So the muscular system is composed of muscles and tendons. Tendons are what secure muscle to bone. What does the muscular system do? It allows manipulation of the environment, locomotion, movement, and facial expressions. It also maintains posture, and it produces heat. And heat is kind of a byproduct of muscle movement when ATP is used, but it does help us to maintain homeostasis and maintain the correct body temperature so that our enzymes can work. Another system we'll be covering in A&P1 is the nervous system. And looking at the picture, you can see the nervous system is made of the brain and the nerves and the spinal cord and receptors all over the body. So, composed of the brain, the spinal column, and nerves. The function of the nervous system is the fast-acting control system. It's very fast, nerve impulses, milliseconds from one side of the body to the next. So it responds or reacts very quickly. It responds to stimuli by activating muscles and glands. It activates muscles and glands. Muscles and glands are really the only thing that can do something, produce an action. Muscles are going to contract or not contract. Glands are going to secrete or not secrete. In A&P2, you'll begin the semester with the endocrine system, and the endocrine system is made up of several endocrine organs and some endocrine tissues as well. Some examples are the thyroid gland, the thymus, gland, the adrenal gland, pancreas, ovaries, testes, pituitary gland, pineal gland. Glands secrete hormones. And if you remember, maybe from another biology class, hormones are produced by an organ and sent somewhere else to do their action. And most of the time, hormones travel in the bloodstream. They regulate growth, they regulate reproduction, and control metabolism. These are slower acting than a nerve impulse, so even though the nervous system and the endocrine system both do body control, the nervous system is fast, the endocrine system is slow. Another system you'll study in A&P2 is the cardiovascular system, and it's comprised of the heart and the blood vessels, and the blood that goes through the blood vessels. The heart pumps blood throughout the body through blood vessels. The blood vessels transport that blood to different parts of the body, bringing nutrients and taking away waste, bringing oxygen and taking away carbon dioxide. Another system you'll study in A&P2 is the lymphatic system. Sometimes we call the lymphatic system immunity or the immune system, but it's really the lymphatic system has some other functions as well as providing immunity for the body. So that's a little bit confusing if you say immune system because you're leaving out some other functions like draining interstitial fluid and transporting fats. So the lymphatic system is made of the bone marrow where white blood cells and red blood cells are made and platelets. The thymus gland is where T cells go to mature. Lymphatic vessels, they're not like blood vessels that go in a circle. They're blind-ended. That means they start and stop. And then the spleen and lymph nodes. So we have red bone marrow, thymus, spleen, lymph nodes, and lymphatic vessels. They pick up leaked fluid from blood vessels and return it to the bloodstream. You know, if you become swollen, it's because the lymphatic system is not able to pick up the fluid that's leaked out of the blood system fast enough. It also disposes of debris in the lymphatic system. It houses white blood cells involved in immunity. Another system you'll study in A&P2 is the respiratory system. The respiratory system involves the nasal cavity, the pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, the bronchi, and the lungs. The job of the respiratory system, it supplies oxygen and removes carbon dioxide. The digestive system is another system that we'll study in A&P2. It begins with the mouth, the oral cavity, then food goes from the mouth to the pharynx, to the esophagus, to the stomach, to the small intestine, to the large intestine, and out. But there are some accessory glands that help the digestive system, like the liver and the pancreas, the gallbladder, salivary glands. So the digestive system has many, many organs. Oral cavity, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, rectum, anus, liver, pharynx. What the digestive system does is break down food into absorbable units that enter the blood. So it processes food. It eliminates indigestible foodstuffs as feces. So it gets rid of the waste that the body can't use. Another system you'll study in A&P2 is the urinary system. The urinary system is composed of the kidneys, the ureters, the urinary bladder, and the urethra. The job of the urinary system is to eliminate nitrogenous or cellular waste from the body. This is not food that you couldn't process. This is chemicals that were absorbed into the bloodstream, went to cells. The cells use those chemicals and spit out some waste chemicals, and those waste chemicals are mostly nitrogen. They have nitrogen in them, so we say nitrogenous waste like ammonia, urea, and those are eliminated from the body. The urinary system also regulates the amount of water, the amount of electrolytes, and helps with pH balance of the blood. The last system we'll look at in A&P2 is the reproductive system. We'll look at the male reproductive system and the female reproductive system. Some organs of the male reproductive system are the prostate gland, the penis, the testes, the scrotum, the ductus or vas deferens. The job of the male reproductive system is the production of offspring. Also, because the testes are really endocrine, also they produce hormones that regulate the male reproductive cycle, help to produce sperm and their maturation process. So the testes produce sperm and male sex hormones, mostly testosterone. There are a series of ducts that once those sperm are made in the testes, the sperm travel through those ducts and the glands deliver the fluid for the sperm, and then the penis delivers the semen into the female reproductive tract. Female reproductive system is composed of mammary glands to provide milk for the baby, ovaries, the uterine tubes, the uterus, vagina. The main function of the female reproductive system is the production of offspring. The ovary, which is the female gonad, produces eggs and female sex hormones like estrogen and progesterone. The remaining structures serve as sites for fertilization, that would be in the uterine tubes, and fetal development, that would be in the uterus. And the mammary glands, as I said a while ago, produce milk to nourish the newborn. So that was a quick overview of the 11 systems of the body. So let's practice a little bit. What system am I talking about? Heart, blood, and vessels. If you said cardiovascular, you are correct. What system has the kidney, the bladder, and the ureters? That would be the urinary system. Which one has the femur and the scapula and the cranium or skull? That would be the skeletal system. What system has ovaries, testes, uterus, prostate? That would be the reproductive system. How about ovaries, testes? Oh, there they are again, but we're putting them with the thymus and the pituitary. Now we have to say it's the endocrine system. Gluteus maximus, biceps, triceps, quadriceps, those are all muscles, so it's the muscular system. Lungs, trachea, bronchi, that would be the respiratory system. Stomach, intestines, esophagus, digestive system. Skin, sweat and oil glands, integumentary system. Brain, spinal cord, nerves, nervous system. Thymus, bone marrow, lymph nodes, tonsils, well, kind of got a hint there, lymphatic system. What system transports substances in the body? That would be the cardiovascular system. What system processes food? That would be the digestive system. What system rids the body of liquid, metabolic, or nitrogenous waste? That would be the urinary system. What system continues the species? Reproduction. What system controls with slow hormones? Endocrine. Which one controls with fast impulses? Nervous. Which one supports, provides movement, protection, and blood production? Don't get confused. Skeletal system. But which one also provides movement, but this one provides heat production? That would be the muscular. Which one protects, heat regulation, and vitamin D production? That would be the integumentary system. Which one is the exchange of gases? That would be the respiratory system. Support, movement, blood production, we've really already had that one, skeletal. And there's one that I didn't have on there, which one provides immunity, and that would be the lymphatic. So let's move on to physiology. Physiology is the study of function, But if you wanted to look at the physiology of your entire body, not a specific organ or a system, you would have to say that the function of your body is to stay the same. You want to stay the same temperature. You really want to stay the same size. You want to have your heart beat at the same beats per minute, the same temperature. Homeostasis is a process of staying the same, a balancing act to stay stable. So, as we look at how the body tries to balance itself or stay stable, there are some things that the body needs in order to do that. Processes needed for life. One thing, to be living, you have to maintain boundaries. You have to have a membrane around your outside and then dividing you into different compartments. Cells are divided from each other by their plasma membranes or cell membranes. Another process needed for life is movement. All living things are going to move. Now, you might not see the movement, but because the movement may be internal. Like you might sit and look at a plant all day long, it's living, and not see it move. But if you take a picture of it today and you come back 3 days from now and take a picture of it, it's probably moved or grown. But while you're looking at it today, there's actually fluids moving through the xylem and phloem. So there's movement. Living things move. Now, some living things actually have locomotion provided by cilia or flagella, or our skeletal muscles and skeleton provide us locomotion by moving our body around. So there is internal movement, and then there is when the whole structure moves, which would be locomotion. All living things respond. That means that if you hit them with a stimulus or you change something about their environment, they will react to it and produce a change, trying to go back to homeostasis. If I were to move my plant away from the window, it would start growing towards light or window, trying to respond to that darkness by seeking out the light. If I were to turn up the heat in the room, my body would respond by starting to sweat. My heart rate would increase, trying to get that hot temperature that travels in the blood, that heat, to my blood vessels in my skin. All living things have to have the ability to digest. That means to break down. Your stomach is one of the organs of the digestive system that breaks from large to small. So digestion is the ability to break big molecules into small molecules. Another process needed is metabolism. Metabolism is all the chemical reactions going on in your body at one time. It's where you take those small particles you've digested and you rearrange them, you use them, and then you get rid of the waste particles. Metabolism. Now, if I'm taking chemicals and I'm making something new with it, that's called anabolism. Chemistry says it's synthesis, but biology people call it anabolism. If you're breaking something down, that type of metabolism is catabolism. And I always like to do that. It's breaking. So catabolism is breaking down. Anabolism is making or producing more. In chemistry, that would be decomposition for catabolism. Another process of life is excretion. When you've gone through metabolism and you end up with waste products, it's getting rid of those waste products that the body or the cell has no use for. Excretion. Getting rid of metabolic or cellular waste. Living organisms also have to have the ability to reproduce. That means to make more of the same kind, to put an egg and a sperm together and make a zygote, to reproduce, to make more of. So there's the egg and the sperm coming together to be the zygote and then the baby. Or it could be two cells going through one cell going through mitosis to produce two cells. Mitosis is a form of reproduction. Also in the human body, you see meiosis, which is the production of sex cells. And the last process of life is growth. Growth is different than reproduction, where we might grow a tissue bigger by mitosis. It was because the individual cells reproduced. So growing is to make bigger. Reproduction is to make more. So as we move from an infant to a child to an adult, with the cells and tissues we have, the tissues and the organs we have grow bigger because we have produced more cells. Living things also have survival needs. These are hints. One survival need is nutrients. There are macronutrients. There are 4 major macronutrients that humans need. This is a hint. Carbohydrates, or we consider those sweets. Fats, or lipids. I had butter. Proteins, which we get from meat. And the last one people have a hard time finding or thinking of it, but it is in the nucleus, nucleic acids. So in order to survive, all living things, including humans, need nutrients. There are 4 macronutrients: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. We also need micronutrients, and the 2 types of micronutrients are vitamins and minerals. There are fat-soluble vitamins in the body, and then there are water-soluble vitamins in the body. And then minerals, vitamins are organic, minerals are inorganic. That would be like calcium and phosphorus and potassium and sodium, minerals. Vitamins, I told you, fat-soluble and water-soluble. Does anybody know the 4 fat-soluble vitamins? That would be vitamin A, D, E, and K. A, D, E, and K. I don't know if you say A, D, E, and K, A, D, E, and K, A, D, E, and K, you'll remember it. And then that only leaves 2 types to be water soluble. That means they travel in water. And that would be B's vitamins, there's several, and vitamin C. So it's between the A and the D. Another substance that's essential for life is oxygen. Does anybody know why we need oxygen? A lot of times when I'm lecturing, people say to breathe, to live, and I'll say yes, but what exactly do you do with the oxygen? And not many people know, but you take oxygen into your body and your cells use oxygen to break down glucose into energy. It's called cellular respiration, and the byproduct of cellular respiration is carbon dioxide. Another essential need is water. You are mostly water. Water is a traveling substance. Water is a substance that makes solutions and gives off electrolytes. Water helps you to regulate temperature. Water is essential. Another essential need of living things, the human, is body temperature. Do you know what normal body temperature is? 98.6 Celsius or 37 degrees, 98.6 Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius. I'm getting mixed up because I was going to tell you that I read an article recently where they're thinking about changing normal body temperature because it's actually is a little lower now that they're getting new averages. 98.6 Fahrenheit, 37 degrees Celsius. And another need is normal atmospheric pressure. We need the right amount of air pushing down on us. You're going to see in the respiratory system that atmospheric pressure actually enables you to breathe, inspiration, and then expiration, because that air pressure is pushing down at a constant pressure. Now, if we go up into the mountains or down below the mountains, it's going to change a little bit, but normal atmospheric pressure. Now, let's talk about the regulation of homeostasis. How do we regulate that system that's trying to keep us stable? Well, there's two different ways. One way is that we can use body fluids. A lot of people skip right over that, but we can regulate body fluids and change our internal environment. If you have too much sodium, then you're going to retain fluid. Fluid's going to move into that area to try to balance that out. If you have too much sodium, then once that sodium's dissolved in the liquid, then you'll urinate it with the sodium and get rid of the body. Fluids move in and bring substances with them that can change the inside of a cell or the inside of an organ. So by moving body fluids, we can regulate our internal environment and change and thus regulate homeostasis. You have intracellular fluid and you have extracellular fluid. Of course, intracellular fluid is the fluid that's inside the cell. Extracellular fluid is outside the cell. In the human body, plasma, which is the fluid in the blood, is an extracellular fluid. Interstitial fluid, which is in the tissues, is an extracellular fluid. Constant movement from intracellular to extracellular, moving substances with them, can change the internal environment and thus help maintain homeostasis. Another way to regulate homeostasis is with the nervous system and the endocrine system. If you remember, those are both controlling systems. The nervous system does it with fast nerve impulses. The endocrine system does it with slower hormones. So fast, brief nerve impulses or slower chemical hormones. Now, the nervous system and the endocrine system use what we call feedback systems. There are two types of feedback systems. One of them is positive and one of them is negative. Let's look at the components that make up a feedback system. First, you're going to have a receptor, something that's monitoring the levels, whether it's the oxygen levels or the amount of sodium in the solution, but it's monitoring some kind of substance or process in the body. And when it's stimulated when there's a change. It's stimulated and it's going to send a message to the brain. The brain's going to figure out what to do and send a command or an impulse to effectors. Now, I don't know if you remember me saying this way back in the beginning of the notes, but there's basically only two things you can do when you respond or you have an effect, and it's muscles and glands. You either move a muscle or you don't move a muscle, or you secrete or you don't secrete. So every response to changes in these feedback systems is either going to be, we're going to change a muscle or we're going to secrete or not secrete. So we have something change, the receptor picks up on it, sends the message to the brain, and the spinal cord, it sends a message to an effector, whether it's a endocrine organ or a muscle. So a stimulus produces a change or an imbalance. It's detected by a receptor. The receptor sends the information, the input, to a control center, brain and spinal cord most of the time, and it figures out what to do, sends an impulse back to an effector, and the effector then is going to produce a response, either move a muscle or not move a muscle, secrete a hormone or not secrete a hormone. Let's look at a negative feedback system. Now, don't think of something bad. Think of math. Some of you may think, well, that is bad, but no, it's not bad. Negative, when you say the negative of a negative, what are you really saying? You're saying the opposite of a negative. So that negative sign means the opposite of. So when a negative feedback system, you have something that gets out of balance. Maybe your sodium level goes up. A receptor picks up on that high sodium level, sends a message to the brain. The brain figures out what to do, sends a message maybe to the kidney, and tells the kidney to release sodium, and so you get back to balance. This example is about blood glucose. Something, maybe you ate a real sugary substance, a candy bar, and so your blood glucose level rises, and then that high glucose level is picked up by receptor cells in the pancreas, and the pancreas then releases insulin, and then insulin causes the liver to take up the extra glucose and put it into storage so that you go back down to normal blood glucose level. So I said most of the time when you're sending information, it's to the brain, but sometimes we can actually bypass the brain with local feedback systems. So when something goes down, your body goes through a series of steps to bring it back up, and the opposite is true. If the temperature were to go up in this room and you were to get hot, then your receptors in your skin are going to pick up on that rise in temperature, send information to the brain, and brain's going to cause the heart to beat faster, cause your respiration to pick up, cause you to start sweating, releasing sweat in the heat away from the body so that you get back down to normal body temperature. And here's the one about temperature. Temperature-sensitive cells in the skin and the brain pick up on a change in temperature. Information goes to the brain, to the thermoregulatory center. It sends information back to the sweat glands, and you start sweating, and you get back to normal temperature. And the other way is true as well. Say you're too cold, your receptors in your skin and your brain pick up on that, send it to the thermoregulator center in your brain, which sends messages back to your skeletal muscles, which start to contract, and you start having shivers, and that shiver, a byproduct of muscle reaction, is muscle action is heat, and so that's going to raise the body temperature. Another feedback system is called a positive feedback system. In a positive feedback system, there's some kind of action that happens. Receptors pick up on it, but what they do is they keep sending out impulses, stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger until we reach homeostasis. Blood clotting is a good example of a positive feedback. You have a break in the vessel. There are cells in the area that pick up on that broken vessel because you have things that should be in the blood that are now out in the tissue. And so they send a message to some kind of nervous control. The nervous control then releases factors that start the blood clotting, and you clot. So you break a vessel, you send information out, and then you clot, 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 clot until you stop the bleeding. So it increases until homeostasis is reached. Another positive feedback system would be when you have a baby. Signals are sent out, messages are sent to effectors, and you're going to have contractions, 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 stronger, stronger, stronger until the baby is born. So positive feedback increases until homeostasis is reached. Another positive feedback system I was trying to think is the immune system. You're going to fight, 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 fight till you either win the battle or you die. So that's another positive feedback system. So if homeostasis gets knocked out of balance and you can't get it back into balance, we call that stress. You can have local stress or systemic stress, and unless your body fixes that homeostatic imbalance, takes away that stress, it's going to lead to disease of the cells or the organ or the whole system, and then potentially death. So how do we know that we have an imbalance in our homeostatic systems? How do we know? Well, we have ways of detecting that, and those are called symptoms and signs. Symptoms and signs. Does anybody know the difference between symptoms and signs? Signs are something you can measure or see. Symptoms are something that you feel. If I said my head is hurting, you really can't measure that. Well, you could with an MRI somehow, but just you as a nurse or a healthcare professional couldn't. You wouldn't know if my head was really hurting. So that would have to be a symptom. But if I had fever, then that would be a sign. If I was pale that would be a sign. If I was bleeding, that would be a sign. If I said I was nauseous, that would be a symptom. If I threw up, that would be a sign. If I have high blood pressure, that would be a sign, because you'd have to take my blood pressure with a sphygmomanometer and a stethoscope. So let's move now into anatomical terms. You are going to go to Anatomy 1 lab, and in that first lab, well, you may do safety in the first lab, but the first real lab, you're going to be looking at anatomical terms, and your lab instructor is probably going to go all over all of the terms and the importance of them and give you examples. So usually we don't cover this information in lecture so much, but I'm going to go through it very quickly. Now, to understand anatomical terms, you have to realize that the body must be in anatomical position, because if we're not in anatomical position, then we cannot compare one body part to another body part and be on the same page, because I might be visualizing a person standing up, like this man who is in anatomical position, and you might be thinking of a person laying on the bed on their back, and somebody else might be thinking of a person sitting down. And so if a patient is sitting, their heart is actually above their gluteus maximus. Well, that would be an anatomical position. If they're laying down, their heart is not going to be above. Their heart is going to be on the same level. Well, that's not what I wanted to do. Let me back up. For example, if I didn't put you in anatomical position, if you were on all fours like a dog, your top surface would be your superior, that would be your back. But in anatomical position, superior, your top surface is not your back, it's your head. So anatomical position gives us a starting place, somewhere we can start, and everybody can say, okay, I'm looking at this person, and looking at his hand, is his hand above or below his feet? Or is his knee above or below his elbow? Or looking at his leg, which is the further distance from his hip? Is it his foot or his knee? We have to be in the same point of orientation. We have to start at the same place, and that's anatomical position. So that is a person standing erect with their feet slightly spread apart, toes pointing forward, arms at your side, palms pointing forward as well. Head looking straight out. So let's look at some directional terms of somebody that's in anatomical position. Superior, cephalic, cranial all mean above. All mean above. Inferior, caudal. Caudal is used more with fish, like a caudal fin, but inferior and caudal mean below. So I need to know that superior means above and inferior means below, but I need to be able to use them in a sentence. For example, my head is what to my shoulders? My head is superior to my shoulders. But what are my shoulders to my head? My shoulders to my head are inferior, above and below. Anterior and ventral. In a human standing in anatomical position, anterior and ventral are the same. It's the front, the belly side of the body. Posterior and dorsal are behind. Think of dorsal as the bony back. So ventral, belly, dorsal, bony back. So I might say that my heart is what to my spinal column. My heart is anterior. It's in front of my spinal column. My spinal column is what to my heart? It is posterior or dorsal to my heart. So superior, above, inferior, below. Anterior and ventral in front of, posterior and dorsal behind. Prone and supine. I always like to say, if I'm laying on my spine, I am supine. So if you're structure or your person is laying on their dorsal surface, then they're supine. If they're laying on their belly or their ventral surface, they're prone. Now we can also do that with our hand. If we lay our hand on the table with the palm down, then we're prone. That hand is prone. But if we lay it on its backside, then it's supine. Medial and lateral. Medial means more towards the middle, where lateral means more towards the side. Best example I can give you. Your nose is medial compared to your ears, which are lateral. Your nose is medial compared to your eyes, which are lateral. If I am comparing my right ear and my right eye, they're on the same side, so they're ipsilateral. If I was comparing my right ear and my left ear, they're on opposite sides, so they're contralateral. Now, if I want to compare my ears, my eyes, and my nose is medial, my ears are lateral, but my eyes are in between medial and lateral, so they're intermediate. Same side, opposite side, in between. Medial towards the middle, lateral towards the side, in between medial and lateral, intermediate. Proximal and distal. To use proximal and distal, you have to have a point of origin. For example, your arm is attached to your body at the shoulder. So if I compare my shoulder to my elbow, my shoulder is closer to the point of origin, so it's proximal. My elbow is a further distance away, so it's distal. But then if I compare my elbow and my hand, my elbow is now closer to the point of origin, so it's proximal, and my hand or fingers are distal, a further distance away. Closer to the origin, a farther distance away from the origin. Proximal, distal. Superficial and deep. Superficial is towards the outer surface. Deep is further from the surface. For example, if I compared my skin and my skin is superficial, my muscle is deep. If I compare my muscle and my bone is deep and my muscle is now superficial. Parietal and visceral. You have membranes that line your closed cavities, and there's always two of them. One that covers the organ and one that lines the cavity. The one that lines the cavity is called parietal. The one that covers the organ, see that C in visceral? The one that covers the organ is visceral. So parietal always lines, visceral always covers. And there's a space found between parietal and visceral that's usually filled with fluid, so that when the heart beats and it comes up against that sac around it called the pericardium, there's lubrication between the two. So parietal lines, visceral covers. Planes of the body. How do we divide the body so that we can talk about certain areas? If we divide the body into right and left, it's sagittal. It's a sagittal plane. If we do it in equal right and left, it's mid-sagittal. If we do it in unequal right and left, it's parasagittal. So if I drew a line right down between my eyes and the nose, right in the middle of my mouth, went down my belly button, that would be mid-sagittal. But if I drew one where I cut off my right arm, that would be parasagittal. Frontal or coronal. That's pretty easy because it's going to create a front and a back. Frontal. Oh, and let me tell you how you remember sagittal, how I remember sagittal anyway. It has two T's in it, so I'm going to separate those two T's into the right and left T, sagittal. Frontal separates into front and back, or anterior and posterior. Transverse or horizontal or cross section is going to separate into top and bottom. Transverse, top and bottom, or superior and inferior. An oblique is one that goes at an angle. It's not parallel or perpendicular to the body, but it is at an angle. Diagonal. So looking at this lady, this one would be sagittal, divides into right and left. This one would be frontal or coronal, front and back. This one would be transverse, top and bottom. This one would be oblique, at a diagonal. Body cavities. If I start dividing my interior into pieces, I can see that the inside of my body has cavities that hold organs. A dorsal cavity, do you remember what dorsal is? Bony back. Those are going to be the cavities of the backside. So that's going to be the cranial that houses the brain and the spinal that houses the spinal cord. So that would be the yellow cavities or the dorsal cavities, and the red cavities are on the belly side. They're the ventral cavities. Dorsal cavities are cranial and vertebral or sometimes spinal cavities. If you look at the ventral cavities, they're divided into top and bottom or superior and inferior by the diaphragm. The superior cavity is the thoracic cavity that holds the lungs and the heart. And the below cavity, there's actually two, the abdominal and the pelvic. Now, there's not really a dividing point between the abdominal and pelvic. That's an imaginary line that goes from the top of the hip bone down to the pubic bone. But the diaphragm definitely is a structure. So, ventral is separated by what? The diaphragm. The ventral cavity that's superior is thoracic. We can divide the thoracic into the cavities that hold the lungs, plural. The cavities that hold the heart, the cavity that holds the heart, pericardial. And that pericardial cavity is in the middle of the thoracic cavity. The middle of the thoracic cavity is called the mediastinum. So lungs are in the pleural cavity, heart is in the pericardial cavity. So looking at this, the blue lines are going to the pleural cavities. The gray arrow is going to the pericardial cavity. And that area in the middle of the thoracic cavity is the mediastinum. Abdominal pelvic cavities you can divide into abdominal that's superior and pelvic that's inferior. Remember, there's not a real structure that separates, just an imaginary line. So let's look again. Ventral is the superior and inferior divided by the diaphragm. The superior is thoracic. The inferior is abdominal and pelvic. Now, remember me saying parietal and visceral, that all closed cavities are surrounded, are lined with membranes, and the organs in those cavities are covered with membranes. Those membranes are called serous membranes, visceral and parietal, and then remember there's a space between that has fluid, so when the two membranes come together as the organ moves, there's no friction. So visceral has the C in it, it covers the organ, so it's going to be deep, and the parietal lines the cavity, so it's going to be superficial. And the fluid provides lubrication. So, different kinds of serous membranes are pleura, pericardial membranes, and peritoneum, which is the visceral coverings of the abdominal pelvic cavity. Now, some organs end up outside of that peritoneal cavity, and so we call them retroperitoneal. For example, your kidneys develop behind the peritoneum, so they actually have parietal peritoneum on the front of them, and then they have this fascia on the back of them holding them to the back abdominal cavity. So if an organ appears outside of that peritoneal sac, we say it's retroperitoneal. Other body cavities that are lined with mucous membranes, they're open cavities, oral and digestive lumen, the nasal cavity, the orbital, the eye cavities, the middle ear, and the synovial cavities. So these are lined with mucous membranes, not serous membranes. Serous, closed cavities, mucous, open cavities. And then the last kind of cavity, oh, I'm sorry, and I said synovial a while ago and I shouldn't. The last kind of, well, it is a body cavity, but it's not lined with a mucous membrane, it's lined with a synovial membrane. And synovial membranes are different from the other membranes because they just have connective tissue, not epithelia. We're going to learn that the proper name of a membrane is epithelia and connective tissue together. And so serous membranes have the two layers, mucous membranes have the two layers. Skin, which is the dry membrane, has the 2 layers, but synovial membranes that line synovial or joint cavities have no epithelia. They just have connective. There are 9 abdominal pelvic regions in your abdominal pelvic cavity, and so sometimes we use those so that we can pinpoint where maybe a patient has pain. They might come in and say they're experiencing pain in their lower right iliac region, or we might say it's in their upper left quadrant. So it's a way of dividing that big abdominal pelvic region into smaller pieces. Let's do the quadrants first. We just simply almost divide it into 4 equal parts. This would be the upper right quadrant. Remember, switch your right and left when you're looking at a picture. It'd be like if you turned yourself around and laid down on the page. That's the right side. Upper right, upper left quadrant, lower right quadrant, lower left quadrant. So if my appendix was inflamed, I'd be having pain in my lower right quadrant. More specifically, we can divide that area into 9 regions. I do it in a certain fashion so I can remember them. I always start with this area because that's where our belly button is, and most people know the belly button is the remnant of the umbilical cord. So I start with umbilical. Then I go to right and left iliac because right here is where my hip bones are, and the top of my hip bone is called the iliac crest. So that means this is the right and left iliac. Right and left lumbar. Lumbar is one of those words, anatomical words you're going to have to learn. I say I slumbar on my lumbar when I sleep on my back. So that area extends from around my back to my side. So that's the right and left lumbar. Hypogastric and epigastric. This area right here is umbilical. But if you were to ask a little kid, what is this? He would say his stomach, right? And so a word for stomach is gastric. So this is above the stomach and below the stomach. Epi is on top of, hypo means low or below. So epi and hypogastric. And then these areas up here always used to give me problems. And then I started thinking about a person that's having pains everywhere and they're hypochondriacs. So it's not really the same word, but it makes me think of right and left hypochondriac. Chondra means cartilage, hypo means below, so you're below the cartilage that holds the ribs together. Right and left hypochondriac region. You also have to learn all of these anatomical terms. The best way I know to do it is to print you out an anatomical man, kind of like found in your lab manual, and just start practicing them. Make yourself note cards. Put oral on one side, mouth on the other side, brachial on one side, arm on the other side. If you squat down, your knee is going to pop, and so the back of the knee is popliteal. If you sit down, somebody might pat you on the front of the knee, so the front of the knee, I remember, is patellar. You pedal a bike with your foot, so pedal is foot. I plant my foot firmly on the ground, so the undersurface of my foot is plantar. When I smile, my cheeks go up, and you can see my buck teeth, so cheek is buccal or buccal. If I'm like the great thinker statue, if I rest my chin on my hand and I think great mental thoughts, mental is my chin. These are ways I have learned, some of the harder ones for me. You're going to have to come up with ways to learn yours. Like leg lifts, I consider are cruel and unusual punishment, so the lower leg is cruel. Best way, get you a blank man and fill them in. Another way, flashcards. Put the common term on the front, the anatomical term on the back. That was chapter 1. I hope that this increases your learning. You need to go back and study these notes over and over. Go do the mastering homework. Let that help you learn the terms because there's lots of practice there. Go back and try to fill in the notes on your own. Take the quiz, do the review. All of this is going to help you when you get to the midterm, which is proctored, and you won't have any aides to help you out.